Hi, my name is Okezie, and I am owner and producer of Simple Networking LLC, which is a consulting firm based in Metro Atlanta, Georgia, which specializes in business networking, diversity and inclusion, and cultural awareness training. So I'm excited to be presenting on this admin chat topic of diversity and inclusion. I've also written an article or had an article published for the July 2019 issue of Executive Secretary magazine entitled The Role of Ethics in Your Personal Brand. So today, I'm going to be talking about diversity and inclusion and how significant it is in the workplace as well as in the business sector. I'm also going to talk about how to take advantage and leverage diverse skills and talents in creating, supporting, and inclusive environments within your professional settings. So the agenda is, like I mentioned earlier, I'm just basically going to discuss how to acknowledge, create safe space, and promote diversity and inclusion within the workplace, within your communities, as well as professional settings. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Right? So what are the benefits of diversity and inclusion? So I have a few bullet points here. Diversity and inclusion provides a heightened awareness and sensitivity. I think that people are more empathetic and they're more socially inclined when connecting with coworkers, counterparts, friends, etc. It also deepens understanding of various perspectives, cultures, lifestyles, etc. When you understand or have a understanding of diversity and inclusion, you're more open, you have a more universal mindset, and you're definitely more accommodating. Also, another benefit of diversity and inclusion is that it reduces factors of mistrust, different stereotypes and biases, which we may think may be true or may not be true, but that's basically what a bias is. It's just a theory and not necessarily fact. It also gives exposure to a more universal way of thinking, as I mentioned before. You're a lot more open-minded, and you're definitely less critical and less judgmental in different types of capacities and situations. And then last but not least, diversity and inclusion, they offer opportunities for meaningful relationships. It gives you a chance to connect with someone, to be able to exchange, as well as to support one another. So these are the benefits that I definitely want us to focus on as we're going through this training or through this webinar. So the next slide, I want to talk about the difference between tolerance and appreciation. So I took some time and looked up the definition of tolerance online. And the definition that I have here is a fair, objective, and permissive attitude towards those opinions, beliefs, practices, racial or ethnic origins, etc., which differ from one's own. Then I looked up the term appreciation online, and it says recognition and enjoyment of good qualities of someone or something. So here we have two different meanings which we can apply in our understanding and also our discussion about diversity and inclusion. So you definitely do not want to just tolerate people, tolerate situations, or tolerate different things or norms that are associated with other groups per se, or even other associations. You want to be able to come from the angle of appreciating, finding value and finding worth in that particular person or even in that particular thing, as the definition for appreciation has, as a definition of appreciation explained. And so I have some bullet points here that appreciation acknowledges differences. So it doesn't necessarily cover or combine, but really separates and brings light to or highlights differences. Appreciation also respects values. So it's not going to be overcritical or judgmental, but just definitely respects and appreciates, of course, values and upholds values as well. Appreciation also supports inclusion. And inclusion in the type sense of you have different people, you may have different situations or things of that nature, and being able to include that, which I know is of course, what inclusion means, but really being mindful and being intentional about being inclusive, combining as well as appreciating and observing. Another thing is that appreciation also encourages sharing. So it's also, as I mentioned earlier, creates a safe space for exchange and building relationships. And last but not least, appreciation develops understanding. Like I said, you're moving away from stereotypes and common biases and really understanding, like I said, that different person, that different situation, whatever it may be. The example that I would like to give is my relationship with my younger brother. So I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and my parents are Nigerian immigrants to the United States. So when I was about 9, 10 years old, I was tasked with babysitting my brother. And of course, I didn't particularly like that because it's usually on the weekends. My parents, step out either to go to work, to go to a function, or something of that nature. And I don't get a chance to hang out with my friends or go to the movies, go to concerts, or just do fun things over the weekend. I'm tasked with babysitting my younger brother. So of course there was a bit of resentment, a little bit tense. And so when I tolerated my brother or tolerated babysitting him for a couple of hours, I would just tell him, okay, you stay in one particular place, here's your books, or here's whatever activities you're allowed to do. Don't bother me, don't interrupt me, and if you have, if something comes up or if you have an issue or a problem, that's the only time that you talk to me. Other than that, you stay in your space, I stay in mine. And then when I matured a little bit and started to appreciate my brother and appreciate babysitting him, my attitude, my tone, and even my interaction with him changed. So I would start off by saying, hey, we get to spend time together. Let's watch a movie. Let's pop popcorn. Let's play music and dance, or let's play games or video games. Then in the second part of this story, I'm not only acknowledging my brother, I'm bringing him in and we're doing things together, as opposed to when I was tolerating him, there was a sense of separation. I said, you stay on your side, I stay on mine. I do acknowledge that you're here, but I'm not going to interact with you or build relationships. So I want you to think about that in your professional space and where you work, in the different organizations or even the different types of communities or associations that you're involved in. Are you tolerating certain people or even certain methods or certain types of agendas, or are you appreciating them and building them into, your mode of work, your work ethics, or even how you interact with people? Okay, so I definitely want you to think about that as we're moving forward in this presentation and webinar. Okay, and then next slide, I love this picture. I was a French major when I was in school, which my parents still don't think that's a major, but that's okay. I studied French cultural studies and minored in African studies, and I did translations for a little bit before I transitioned into teaching the seminars and workshops. And so a lot of the training that I do, I love to take different images from pictures and paintings, as well as, different types of games that I play with my attendees in order to get them to learn in a different capacity, as well as to be able to, understand networking or diversity and inclusion from a different perspective. So in this case, today we're going to talk about this picture here, which was drawn by or painted by a neo-French Impressionist artist called Gustave Caillebotte in 1877. And it's called Rainy Day, but the French term or the French translation is Rue de Paris, Temps de Pluie. And this picture is actually in the Arts Institute of Chicago here in the United States. So if you're ever in the Chicago area or live there, I definitely recommend that you stop by, the Arts Institute of Chicago to see this picture. But in any case, I'm going to describe this picture in the lens of diversity and inclusion. So I want you to get the landscape. During the late 1900s, Paris was going through a physical as well as cultural, economic change. The French government had actually tasked a surveyor or an engineer named Haussmann to start to change the layout, the physical layout of the city of Paris, because they wanted Paris to be, a gateway to Europe, an international city. So they wanted to make it easy for people to travel to Paris and to move around the city comfortably, and also to see different types of exhibits and different types of shows and entertainment as well. So in this picture, you have a couple that is under the umbrella, and this couple represents a new emerging society or new emerging generation of working class young professionals, or bourgeoisie, as labeled in French. And if you look behind them, you can also see these different buildings. I was actually in this area, of course not in the 1800s, but when I did my study abroad in Paris. So you can see the different shapes of the buildings, their style and their geometric architecture. But I also want you to know that in this particular intersection, you have about 11 or 12 streets that intersect at one point. So it goes back to the surveyor or the engineer who is designing the city to make it easy to transport as well as to move around. So we have someone who is changing the layout, the physical layout of the city. And then we have Caillebotte, who is the painter. He is actually painting what the surveyor is creating, or what the surveyor is establishing as this new international city as Paris, France. So the painter, he is, first of all, he is homosexual. He was out during that time. It was quite evident. You can also see that in a lot of his work that he painted. He was also very rich, and that's important because he was able to finance a lot of his projects and different types of paintings and travel in order to become famous and well known. And then we have writers. We have a large group and a community of writers during this particular time that were writing stories, that were, submitting articles and critiquing different types of things that were going on in the city or this new emerging city. And these writers were usually, French men, middle-aged or a little bit older, if you will, that had a community of supporting these different projects. And just to backtrack, Caillebotte was, as we would consider during this particular time, a millennial. So he was painting from his he started painting in his mid-20s. So when it comes to diversity, I know you're probably thinking, well, how is it diverse? Because I've just explained three white male Frenchmen. But I want you to think a little bit deeper in the type sense that they are diverse in skill sets, they are diverse in sexual orientation, they are diverse in socioeconomic status. And the inclusion piece is that they're still all working together as a network, each of them having separate skills, separate branding, images, or personal brands, but they are working together for a common goal. So as you are developing your networks and as you are going out and meeting people and connecting, I want you to think past the common, stereotypes and the common ways of connecting and having homogeneous networks, and focus on the diversity piece of looking for people that are diverse in certain aspects and elements that are not as obvious or can be covered. Okay? And then as we're moving forward, I want to talk about now my simple networking Fantastic Four. So I have a method or a way of using different types of techniques in order to understand, in order to develop, in order to learn how to be effective in certain areas when it comes to networking, when it comes to business and etiquette, ethics, and things of that nature. So today we're going to talk about the Fantastic Four for diversity and inclusion, in which I use 4 methods to describe how we can be practical in using diversity and inclusion within our workspaces, within our professional settings, and also within our communities. We're going to show it from 4 different aspects, and they are play-on-play words, so they all start with ATT, but of course this is not an endorsement for AT&T or any of their affiliates or or digital marketing or things of that nature. So we have attain, which means attain, to attain understanding about diversity. We have attempt, to attempt to step out of our comfort zone. We have attract like-minded individuals. And we have attend activities, events, and functions. So we're going to start with attain. We want to attain understanding about diversity. In order to be effective and efficient and really see the importance of diversity and inclusion, we have to be open-minded and coachable. We can't assume that we know everything. We can't assume that there's one way to do something, and we have to definitely understand things from different perspectives. The other thing is that when you're asking questions, you really want to avoid criticism. I really believe there is a way that you can ask questions in order to gain understanding, in order to be empathetic, and also in order to connect, as opposed to being judgmental, critical, and not being open and understanding. The other thing is I want you to challenge the status quo and stereotypes. I talked about this earlier in the webinar. A lot of times we take theory as fact or take stereotypes or things that were so common seeing a lot and think that that's the way it should be. So I definitely want you to challenge things that may seem obvious or things that we're common and so used to, especially when it comes to a global perspective where you have different cultural norms, different ethnicities, and different values in different types of groups, if you will. And then also, kind of piggyback on what I was saying, to learn to be culturally competent, especially as leaders, as thought leaders, you want to be able to be culturally minded, to be open, and to really embrace different aspects and appreciate different aspects of other people, other working environments, and other settings as well. Okay. The next is that we want to attempt. We want to attempt to step out of our comfort zone. And this, of course, is easier said than done. But as I mentioned before, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, especially in career advancement and networking and things of that nature, studies show that it's always advantageous to have heterogeneous ties, as in for heterogeneous connections, diverse connections, and diverse networks. And we definitely see that in the business sector with corporations and different organizations. And the same goes for your personal and professional development. You have to be willing to associate with different people. And different people can mean different things. Different, like I said, from socioeconomic background, in race, in religion, as well as sexual orientation, and things of that nature. The other thing is that you have to choose to engage in conversation. You have to create these avenues of communication and exchange in order to develop and learn. The other thing is to consider taking training or related courses, of course, similar to this webinar that you're on today, as well as other training, certifications, and different types of programs that can be offered through professional development. And then last but not least, you want to develop long-term relationships. So being more culturally minded, having a more universal mindset is going to take time. It's going to take patience. And it's going to take you putting in effort. So this is really not going to come organically as you may think it may be. So I really encourage you to see it as a long-term journey, a long-term experience. And as you're connecting with different people, consider building long-term relationships. Okay? The next is attract. You want to attract like-minded individuals. So I know this kind of piggybacks over the homogeneous networks that I talked about. But when I say like-minded individuals, I'm talking about people who share your values, that see the importance and appreciate diversity and inclusion, that are willing to be open and willing to be coachable, as opposed to people that are not. Okay? And I like to give the example of doing laundry. We all know that when you're doing laundry, it is recommended that you wash like or similar colors, because we know what happens when you have a white shirt or white socks or white pair of pants and you wash them with something that's red, okay? So I want you to think about it in that perspective when it comes to building relationships and connecting with like-minded individuals. Also, you want to seek out support and encouragement and sustainability. Like I mentioned before, this is really a journey. This is going to take a process, and it's going to involve a lot of effort. And it can be, I wouldn't say daunting, but it can be challenging. Whether you're in your workspace or communities or different organizations, diversity and inclusion may not always be the most welcome topic, and you can touch resistance. And in that case, you have to be able to create support systems, be able to encourage one another, and have this mindset of sustainability. The other thing is to join various interest or affinity groups. Now, depending on how large your organization is, this might require you to do this externally. But in any case, here in the United States, we have meetup.com as an example, where you have different various groups that you can connect with on or offline. And I'm sure there are other groups that Executive Secretary Magazine supports as well. But in any case, you want to be a part of these different groups where you can gain that support and encouragement, be able to connect with like-minded people, and develop your professional and personal skills. And then last but not least, teaming up to advocate for others. So what I've noticed being in business for about 13 years, going on 13 years now, is that it really helps to have a support team, not just to support myself, but also to create a platform to advocate for others, to advocate for people that are underserved, that are undervalued, and that are discriminated against. So these are some of the things that I definitely want you to think about as you are considering and as you are growing into learning more about diversity and inclusion. Okay? And then last but not least is Attain. You want to attend activities, events, and functions that promote diversity and inclusion, that promote cultural awareness, and things of that nature. So as I mentioned before, you can go online, or you can even ask within your existing networks or friends or family about diverse meetups within your area, or diverse meetups as you're traveling and going abroad. Also, join mailing lists of different organizations. So you can't be a member of every single group, but you can definitely sign up for particular groups that align with your core values or align with your mission in developing and learning more about diversity and inclusion, and just get weekly or monthly reminders of different activities that they're doing that you are able to attend and support. The other thing is to connect with multicultural groups, associations, chambers of commerce, and formal groups. I think this is really important because this will give you contact with different people, as we mentioned before, in order to build your skills, in order to learn more, and also in order to advance. And then last but not least, you have to stay constant and consistent in your efforts. As I mentioned before, I want you to think of this as a long-term and also fulfilling process, but it doesn't work if you're really good for 1 or 2, 3 months and then fall off for another 2 or 3 months, because then it takes time to focus, to align, and then to build back that momentum that was lost. So definitely consider it a part of your strategic plan. Consider it a part of your development and your growth. Okay? So now we have an opportunity to just recap. Just kind of reflect on the different things that I discussed during this webinar, such as, creating and acknowledging and promoting diversity and inclusion within your workspace, within your professional settings, as well as in your communities. And then also just remembering the benefits of diversity and inclusion, how it can be a platform for understanding, building long-term relationships, and really minimizing the common stereotypes and other biases, as well as the definitions for tolerance and appreciation. As I mentioned before, tolerance means a fair, objective, and permissive attitude towards those opinions, beliefs, practices, racial or ethnic origins that differ from our own, and versus appreciation, which is a recognition and enjoyment of the good qualities of someone or something. And then also remember my babysitting story with my younger brother. And then also the picture of Rainy Day by Caillebotte, or Temps de pluie, Rue de Paris, Temps de pluie, where you have a network of different skills, different types of diverse aspects that are coming together to accomplish a mutual goal. And then, of course, with our Fantastic Four, to attain, to attempt, and to attract, as well as to attend, in order to be practical in our efforts to be more diverse and to be more inclusive. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this webinar and that you found value in a lot of the different techniques and the strategies that I'm offering to you. Thank you once again for your time, and you're more than welcome to reach out to me for additional information or questions and things of that nature. And as I mentioned before, I did an article in the July 2019 Executive Secretary magazine entitled "The Role of Ethics in Your Personal Brand," where I talk about, how you can be an ethical person in order to gain more trust, as well as to build your networks and your professionalism. But once again, this is Chichi Okezie from Simple Networking, and thank you for having me on the admin chat where I discuss diversity and inclusion.